the horses of each man's mount, so all we had to do was to sing out for our horse, and Billy would have a rope on one and have him at hand before you could unsaddle a tired one. On account of our linguistic accomplishments, Quarternight and I were to be sent across the river to put the cattle in and otherwise assume control. On the Mexican side there was a single string of high brush fence on the lower side of the ford, commencing well out in the water and running back about 200 yards, thus giving us a half chute in forcing the cattle to take swimming water. The ford had been used for years in crossing cattle, but I believe this was the first herd ever crossed that was intended for the trail or for beyond the bounds of Texas. When the herd was within a mile of the river, Fox and I shed our saddles and boots and surplus clothing and started to meet it. The water was chilly, but we struck it with a shout, and with the cheers of our outfit behind us, swam like smugglers. A swimming horse needs freedom, and we scarcely touched the reins, but with one hand buried in a mane hold, and giving gentle slaps on the neck with the other, we guided our horses for the other shore. I was proving out my black. Fox had a gray of equal barrel displacement, both good swimmers, and on reaching the Mexican shore we dismounted and allowed them to roll in the warm sand. Flood had given us general instructions, and we halted the herd about half a mile from the river. The Mexican corporal was only too glad to have us assume charge, and assured us that he and his outfit were ours to command. I at once proclaimed Fox Quarternight, whose years and experience outranked mine, the gringo corporal for the day, at which the vaqueros smiled, but I noticed they never used the word. On Fox's suggestion, the Mexican corporal brought up his wagon and corralled his horses as we had done, when his cook, to our delight, invited all to have coffee before starting. That cook won our everlasting regards, for his coffee was delicious. We praised it highly, whereupon the corporal ordered the cook to have it at hand for the men in the intervals between crossing the different bunches of cattle. A March day on the Rio Grande with wet clothing is not summer, and the vaqueros hesitated a bit before following the example of Quarternight and myself and dispensing with saddle and boots. 5 men were then detailed to hold the herd as compact as possible, and the remainder, 27 all told, cut off about 300 head and started for the river. I took the lead, for though cattle are less gregarious by nature than other animals, under pressure of excitement they will follow a leader. It was about noon and the herd were thirsty, so when we reached the brush chute, all hands started them on a run for the water. When the cattle were once inside the wing, we went rapidly, 4 vaqueros riding outside the fence to keep the cattle from turning the chute on reaching the swimming water. The leaders were crowding me close when Nigger breasted the water, and closely followed by several lead cattle, I struck straight for the American shore. The vaqueros forced every hoof into the river, following and shouting as far as the midstream. When they were swimming so nicely, Quarternight called off the men and all turned their horses back to the Mexican side. On landing opposite the exit from the ford, our men held the cattle as they came out in order to bait the next bunch. I rested my horse only a few minutes before taking the water again, but Lovell urged me to take an extra horse across so as to have a change in case my black became fagged in swimming. Quarternight was a harsh segundo, for no sooner had I reached the other bank than he cut off the second bunch of about 400 and started them. Turning Nigger Boy loose behind the brush fence so as to be out of the way, I galloped out on my second horse, meeting the cattle, turned again and took the lead for the river. My substitute did not swim with the freedom and ease of the black, and several times cattle swam so near that I could lay my hand on their backs. When about halfway over, I heard shoutings behind me in English, and on looking back saw Nigger Boy swimming after us. A number of vaqueros attempted to catch him, but he outswam them and came out with the cattle. The excitement was too much for him to miss. Each trip was a repetition of the former, with varying incident. Every hoof was over in less than 2 hours. On the last trip, in which there were about 700 head, the horse of one of the Mexican vaqueros took cramps, it was supposed, at about the middle of the river, and sank without a moment's warning. A number of us heard the man's terrified cry, only in time to see horse and rider sink. Every man within reach turned to the rescue, and a moment later the man rose to the surface. Fox caught him by the shirt, and shaking the water out of him, turned him over to one of the other vaqueros, who towed him back to their own side. Strange as it may appear, the horse never came to the surface again, which supported the supposition of cramps. After a change of clothes for Quarternight and myself, and rather late dinner for all hands, there yet remained the counting of the herd. The Mexican corporal and two of his men had come over for the purpose, and though Lovell and several wealthy rancheros, the sellers of the cattle, were present, it remained for Flood and the corporal to make the final count, as between buyer and seller. There was also present a river guard, sent out by the United States Custom House as a matter of form in the entry papers, who also insisted on counting. In order to have a second count on the herd, Lovell ordered the rebel to count opposite the government's man. We strung the cattle out, now loggy with water, and after making quite a circle, brought the herd around where there was quite a bluff bank on the river. The herd handled well, and for a quarter of an hour we lined them between our 4 mounted counters. The only difference in the manner of counting between Flood and the Mexican corporal was that the American used a tally string tied to the pommel of his saddle, on which were 10 knots, keeping count by slipping a knot on each even hundred, while the Mexican used 10 small pebbles, shifting a pebble from one hand to the other on hundreds. Just a mere difference in nationality, Lovell had me interpret to the selling dons. When the count ended, only 2 of the men agreed on numbers, the rebel and the corporal making the same 3,105, Flood being 1 under and the custom house man 1 over. Lovell at once accepted the count of Priest and the corporal, and the delivery, which, as I learned during the interpretation that followed, was to be sealed with a supper that night in Brownsville, was consummated. Lovell was compelled to leave us to make the final payment for the herd, and we would not see him again for some time. They were all seated in a vehicle ready to start for town, when the cowman said to his foreman, "Now, Jim, I can't give you any pointers on handling a herd, but you have until the 10th day of September to reach the Blackfoot Agency. An average of 15 miles a day will put you there on time, so don't hurry. I'll try and see you at Dodge and Ogallala on the way. Now, live well, for I like your outfit of men. Your credit letter is good anywhere you need supplies, and if you want more horses on the trail, buy them and draft on me through your letter of credit. If any of your men meet with an accident or get sick, look out for them the same as you would for yourself, and I'll honor all bills. And don't be stingy over your expense account, for if that herd don't make money, you and I had better quit cows." I had been detained to do any interpreting needful, and at parting, Lovell beckoned to me. When I rode alongside the carriage, he gave me his hand and said, "Flood tells me today that you're a brother of Bob Quirk. Bob is to be foreman of my herd that I'm putting up in Nueces County. I'm glad you're here with Jim, though, for it's a longer trip. Yes, you'll get all the circus there is, and stay for the concert besides. They say God is good to the poor and the Irish, and if that's so, you'll pull through all right. Goodbye, son." And as he gave me a hearty, ringing grip of the hand, I couldn't help feeling friendly towards him, Yankee that he was. After Lovell and the Dons had gone, Flood ordered McCann to move his wagon back from the river about a mile. It was now too late in the day to start the herd, and we wanted to graze them well, as it was our first night with them. About half our outfit grazed them around on a large circle, preparatory to bringing them up to the bed ground as it grew dusk. In the untrammeled freedom of the native range, a cow or steer will pick old dry grass on which to lie down, and if it is summer, will prefer an elevation sufficient to catch any passing breeze. Flood was familiar with the habits of cattle, and selected a nice elevation, on which the old dry